Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
Alyeska Pipeline Service Company, fueling philanthropic programs and dedicated to creating educational and professional opportunities for Alaska Native people.
The National Weather Service.
Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. It's the 11th of April. As always, we encourage you to stay up to date with your local weather information for your village or your community. You can do that easily by going to 1-800-472-0391. That's our Alaska Weather Information Line. As always, our weather.gov/Alaska website is available for you. If you'd like to localize your experience more, go to weather.gov/Fairbanks, weather.gov/Juneau, or weather.gov/Anchorage, or type in AAWU after weather.gov. And that takes you right to the Alaska Aviation Weather Unit's information there. NWS.AR.TV weather is an easy way to find us on the email. Just put the at NOAA.gov at the end of that. And of course, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube following this show. If you miss a piece of it or just want to watch the marine section again, go to youtube.com and type in AKwx TV. That's the Alaska Weather TV show on YouTube. I had some friends out at the National Weather Service office in Anchorage on Friday. The Chugach School District offers a 2-week residential classroom experience in the Anchorage area, and folks from all over Alaska fly in, as well as homeschooled students in Anchorage get to participate. And my two friends there on the left side of the screen are working on the balloon and pulling that out of the shed are from Tuluxac. So hello to all of my friends in Tuluxac, and especially to my new two friends there. And you can see they launched the balloon successfully on the right side of the screen. It was a beautiful day on Friday, and certainly a treat to get to meet folks from Valdez and Anchorage and Glen Allen and Tuluxac. So welcome and thank you for joining us in Anchorage the other day for balloon launch. And next time you're in town and you're around the office, we'll stop by and say hi. We'll see what we can do. Here's a look at the hazardous weather situation across western Alaska, around the Bering Strait region, especially St. Lawrence Island. There is a potential for shaping up to be a little bit of a snow, about 2 inches of snow, maybe under a 1/4 inch of freezing rain, and the winds are going to blow. So that's going to lower visibility. We're talking about gusts coming in from the south and southeast initially that could start to ramp up to about 50 miles per hour. Those strong southerly winds will really start to pick up this evening and continue through tomorrow morning. The winter weather advisory that you see for St. Lawrence Island will continue actually until Thursday morning. So you've got a solid 24 to 36 hours out ahead of us where things should really start to deteriorate as far as your weather goes around Gamble and Savunga there, and also into the Bering Strait region, but specifically St. Lawrence Island. So watch for changing weather conditions. It's really going to pick up later on this evening and overnight, especially after midnight tonight. So plan on the weather to get worse as we head into tonight if you're on St. Lawrence Island, the winter weather advisory there. Had some trouble with the satellite pictures today, so we're going to turn this back to Monday, and you can see the storm that was working across the western parts of the central and western Aleutians really starting to change the weather there, but high pressure giving way across the southern Bering Sea and the western Gulf. In the interior, high pressure has been setting up in a decent way to really clear out a lot of the clouds today. And we've also had a decent offshore flow across southeastern Alaska. With that, clouds are breaking up there and temperatures are going up and up. Wait till you see some of the high temperatures for tomorrow. Here's today's surface chart, and high pressure across the central and northern interior, 1,029 millibars there, has been fairly strong. You can see it's really cleared up a lot of the clouds. A lot of the white that you see is indeed snow cover across the mountains and across the tundra, the YK Delta, and into the Seward Peninsula. Not a lot of precipitation, really couldn't find any with the front, at least on the observations at the surface. Now, that doesn't mean it didn't happen, of course. We only have limited amount of observations in Alaska, and there may not be one where you live. However, we didn't see any on any of those reports. So we're going to call this generally a dry front coming in from the west, but it is going to change up the weather conditions a little bit there. It is also the first mark of getting warm and wet air moving up the western coast and the Bering Sea coast there. We did have some rain and snow around the Pribilofs. There was rain around Nikolsky to Unalaska and Dutch Harbor and past Akutan into the southern tip of the Alaska Peninsula. So we know there is certainly a sizable amounts of moisture available. There's warm air and some pretty steady, if not stout, southerly winds. Low pressures dropped to 971 millibars there, and it will slowly creep eastward because high pressure sitting across the Gulf at 1,025 millibars. Here's our trough of low pressure across the northern Gulf. Our friends in southeast are loving this because it's drawing air off of the continent and out to sea. And what that means is the moist air across the ocean is not coming inland toward the mountains. So you know that's a good weather pattern for you. Here's a look at what happens tonight. Conditions stay fairly dry. Conditions stay fairly clear for southeast. There might be a little bit of a breeze, but you can take it if the sky is clear and things are dry, right? That means probably a sunny day tomorrow. Spotty areas of snow showers around the Copper River Basin toward the Alcan border and into the southern parts of the Yukon, maybe out toward Whitehorse. And watch for some spotty areas of snow showers generally north of the Yukon Valley in the interior, up against the south-facing slopes of the Brooks Range, maybe even a little bit closer to the summits there. High pressure has moved northward, just around the north slope and around Barrow at 1,036 millibars. So it's still a pretty good stabilizing force for most of Alaska. Out to the west, low pressure is filling in. That means that lower pressure level is now starting to rise up to 986 millibars. And you can see the cold front working past Adak and Atka and the wraparound moisture and the clouds coming into Shemya and Attu. Warm air still lifting northward through the Bering Strait. St. Lawrence Island past the Bering Strait, in fact, with periods of snow possible around St. Lawrence Island. And notice again that tight pressure gradient that you see here. Those lines of constant pressure are packed in really tight. That means the air is going to be moving very quickly. And with that, again, gusts up to 50 miles per hour may be possible at times, especially picking up later this evening and overnight. So that'll probably continue into the morning hours tomorrow. Here's what we see on Wednesday, and you'll notice that cold front doesn't move very much. The cold front is the leading edge of that new, colder, drier air mass. On this side, ahead of that, that's where all the warm and wet air is. So from St. Lawrence Island down toward Nunivak Island, there's still a pretty steady southerly wind, and rain and snow will be possible in the region. And the thing we're concerned about then is also the potential for freezing rain. Now, generally speaking, in many communities, about a quarter inch of freezing rain's about the limit that most of those power lines can take. You start getting up above that, and power companies and people that are trying to take care of your village start getting a little more concerned about the weight of the ice on top of power lines, because those lines have to stay attached to the poles, right? And you start getting a little extra weight on there. They sag, they become disconnected, they might even break. So right now we're thinking that the potential for freezing rain keeps that threshold under about a quarter inch for St. Lawrence Island, but you're going to want to pay attention to that. And of course, you know, if you've got an opportunity to do so in these types of situations, it's always a good idea to go ahead and charge up that phone. Don't let it sit there if you need to get some power going for tomorrow and the weather's getting worse. Make sure things are plugged in and charging if you're dependent upon the cell phone or mobile devices there that need some extra power. Out across the west, 994 millibar low there across the central and western Bering Sea. In fact, it's two pieces there, so we're actually labeled that as two lows. And this is bringing in that north and westerly flow coming in behind the front. But again, most of western Alaska and southwestern Alaska and the interior are going to be clear, dry, sunny, beautiful day tomorrow with high pressure across the Beaufort Seacoast, 1,037 millibars. And once again, southeastern for a treat. Yes, there is going to be some wind. You'll notice that pressure gradient's kind of packing itself in there across southeast as well. But clear and dry, oh my, sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Here's a look at Thursday. More of the same for southeast. Dry weather continues for you. Still a little breezy, but not as bad on Thursday. For the north and western Gulf, high pressure is now back in charge, but we're getting that offshore wind, so things stay fairly dry there. And for the interior, clouds start to fall apart across the Brooks Range, but the north slope clears out nicely. A cold front is still trying to creep itself eastward, and then we're back into that colder, wetter pattern, and that makes St. Lawrence Island back into a snow regime, it looks like. Probably less of a chance for freezing rain at that point. So the chance for freezing rain probably more centered on what happens very late tonight and into early Wednesday before the colder air sweeps in on Thursday. Out across the central and western Aleutians, another frontal boundary moves across, and the winds will stay up for the central chain with high pressure moving just south across the western Gulf and south and west of Kodiak Island. So a lot going on. A lot of it's really focused out across the west. Temps today, 50s and 60s. It was 60 degrees in Dehne today. Wow, what a day. 40s and 50s across southern parts of the Panhandle where we had a few more clouds. 40s and 50s around southeast and Prince William Sound, I should say. 44 around Homer, 49 for Kenai. Almost 50 degrees in Anchorage, 50 for Talkeetna. Looks like Tok and Northway were close to 50 degrees, as well as Eagle. 44 in Fairbanks, a beautiful day there. 42 for Fort Yukon, 34 in Arctic Village, 25 for AKwx Pass. Teens and 20s for the North Slope, Kotzebue Sound. We saw Kimberley at 17, Shishmaref at 28. 30 around Nome and 30 for Savoonga. Again, cooler weather coming your way eventually. 30s and 40s for Southwest. Bethel was 45, 50 around King Salmon. 30s and 40s for the Alaska Peninsula. Mid-40s for both ends of Kodiak Island. 40 in Unalaska and Dutch Harbor. St. Paul and St. George with a little bit of rain and snow in the region today. 36 in St. Paul, 38 in St. George, and 37 in Shemya. Overnight lows will stay in the mid to upper 30s, closer to 40 in fact for Dutch Harbor, 34 in St. Paul. Southwest and the Yukon Kuskokwim Delta region in the 20s and 30s. Nome 28, Barrow 5. For Yukon 21, Fairbanks looking at mid-20s, South Central back in the mid to upper 20s as well, and Southeast will stay above freezing just about every location except for areas across the outer coast from Sitka northward. High temps tomorrow, 50s and 60s again for Southeast with sunshine. Ooh, I'm jealous. For Prince William Sound, 40s and 50s, 52 around the valley and Anchorage region, close to 50 around the Cook Inlet region, 50 for Kodiak Island, near 50 in fact for Fairbanks, Fort Yukon 37, Barrow 19, 21 at Kaktovik, and a little bit cooler for Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse. Kotzebue Sound temps in the mid to upper 30s, 37 in Nome, low to mid 40s for Southwest. There's a lot of warm air coming your way, and 33 around Savoonga, 37 for St. Paul, and 40s for the Aleutian Chain. Mild weather all the way around. IFR conditions may be limited to areas around St. Lawrence Island all the way down toward Dutch Harbor, Unalaska, and Nikolsky tomorrow. MVFR to start for the inner channels and outer coast for southeast and portions of the North Slope and a few areas just east of Anchorage and up into the Copper River valleys there. That should improve in the morning. North Slope conditions may linger around MVFR, and you can see the IFR conditions wrapping around the front all the way from Dutch Harbor and Unalaska eastward toward the Alaska Peninsula. Southeast looks pretty good. Here's your pass conditions. You could do this with me and blindfolded, I think. Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass, all looking good. VFR conditions there for Lake Clark and Merrill Pass, as well as rainy and windy pass tomorrow. VFR conditions for you. Isabel Pass, we expect VFR. Mentasta Pass looks good at VFR. Tonita Pass looks to be VFR through most of the day, and Portage Pass, VFR conditions there. Smooth sailing, maybe a little bit of bump in the afternoon. VFR conditions for Chilkoot and White Pass too. Freezing levels indicate that warm air aloft is surging northward, no question about it. Levels from St. Matthew to Nunivak Island through the Alaska Peninsula and southward anywhere from 4 to 6, even 8,000 feet there. 4,000 foot levels taking over southeastern Alaska and 2,000 foot levels as far north as Shishmaref and Kotzebue Sound. So yes, warm air is on the way. Icing potential comes with that though. That stout southerly flow pushes the levels a little bit higher, above 5,000 feet to above 8,000 feet across the eastern sections of the Aleutians, but most of that right now seems to be light to isolated moderate. The one caveat to that would be, of course, around St. Lawrence Island, flying in and out of Savoonga or Gamble tomorrow. Pay attention to the weather because there could be a very small area of a geographic area that could be very highly susceptible to isolated or occasional severe icing if freezing rain is actually setting up there. So keep your eye on that with that winter weather advisory. That begins at midnight tonight and goes all the way to 6 o'clock on Thursday morning. So a very small risk and a geographic area for isolated severe around St. Lawrence Island. Now, the jet stream. Is it any wonder that warm air is pumping into the Bering Sea? Look at this. It looks like a crazy octopus, doesn't it? Here's the head and here's the arms. Low pressures here across the Bering Sea. We have northerly winds on the west side of that, about 100 knots, and then it just flies northward, 100 to 120 knots due south, grabbing warm and wet air from the Pacific and sending that all the way into the Arctic Ocean. And then we get the drier flow for most of the mainland there, 65 to 100 knots, coming in almost due north. And then that moisture misses southeastern Alaska right now, kind of cut out of that moisture pattern that you've been locked in for a while. And we're sending all that into the west coast of the United States again, lower 48. So crazy octopus weather here, I guess, at the jet stream. That gives us that warm air in the Bering and very dry conditions for mainland Alaska. At 9,000 feet, similar conditions there. Here's the southerly flow, 50 knots across the Bering Strait and the Eastern Aleutians and very light winds across the mainland. A light southwesterly flow up the Chukchi coast. Here's our offshore winds, 15 to 30 across southeast. At 3,000 feet, pretty much the same thing. Southerly winds again up to 50 knots through the Bering Strait, 40 knots around the Pribilofs, 35 knots for the eastern chain. More of a westerly flow across the central and western chain. Light winds across the mainland and our offshore flow across southeast, anywhere from 25 to 30 at its highest. So a few bumps across the northern Gulf below 4,000 feet because of those outflow winds and gap winds, but not too much. The worst of the bumps will be across the faster flow across the west coast, anywhere from 4,000 feet and below. Watch for some additional or occasional moderate turbulence around land areas in the islands, the Pribilofs, the eastern chain, the Alaska Peninsula, Nunivak Island, and of course St. Lawrence Island and parts of the central and western chain out toward Kiska and Attu. That's a look at your aviation weather. I'll be back with the rest of your sea ice, edge, and marine forecast here in just a few minutes. Stay tuned.
There are many different types of aircraft being used in Southeast Alaska. Air commerce here is utilized the way the rest of the U.S. uses taxis, buses, and trucks. Helicopters and float planes are the most widely used aircraft. However, fixed gear and retractable gear aircraft are found in most Alaskan fleets. Be sure to monitor a local radio frequency at all times and make frequent position reports. It's important that you file a flight plan and stick to it. Then, if an emergency landing is imminent, the radio is already set to make a report. Be aware that several large air carriers land at Ketchikan, Wrangell, Petersburg, Sitka, Gustavus, and Juneau. Having good communication and keeping vigilant can save you from becoming a near mid-air collision or NMAC statistic. The vortices that are generated by these large aircraft can cause a smaller aircraft to be forced onto the runway during landing or departure. To avoid wake turbulence, try landing beyond the larger aircraft's touchdown point and take off prior to their rotation point. It's best to wait the recommended 3 to 5 minutes for wake turbulence abatement. If the tower does not make a recommendation for a wait for wake turbulence abatement, the pilot should make the request. While on cross-country flights, plot your course on the chart. Keep a close track of where you are at all times. It's easy for one inlet or bay to look very much like another. Pilotage is a skill that is alive and well in Alaska. Navigation aids are few and far between, and a GPS should only be used as a backup for the chart and pilotage. As a reminder, there are no GPS instrument approaches in Southeast Alaska at this time. Remember that alternating or flashing landing lights are unique to Alaska's aviation community. They are used to enhance visibility of aircraft in flight. A word of caution: remain within gliding distance of the shore when at all possible. The water is very cold, even in the summer. In the event of a forced water landing, the chances of survival are very slim due to hypothermia. Weather changes rapidly, and often the changes are not forecast. Making a 180-degree turn and a precautionary landing at the first available landing area, even a beach, can save your life. Pilots often wait out bad weather at an outlying strip or beach. You should always be prepared to lay over until better weather arrives. If the wind is blowing, chances are the skies will be clear, but the ride bumpy. Wind can be seen on the water in the form of whitecaps. This indicates that the water could be too rough for landing a float plane. It's wise to call flight service prior to departure to see what the surface conditions will be at your intended airport destination. As the saying goes, if you don't like the weather here, just wait 10 minutes. The 60 nautical mile trip to Haines from Juneau is fairly straightforward. One noteworthy item is the lack of beaches in the area. The slope of the mountains continues to the bottom of the canal, causing small rocky outcroppings in most areas. Flying up the Lynn Canal to Chilkat Inlet is the preferred route to Haines. The Lynn Canal has several prominent reporting points that are used by the local operators and private pilots. After departing Juneau to the west, you should fly to the right side of Lynn Canal, close to the land mass. Utilize the hemispheric rule for determining your flying altitude. The first prominent departure reporting points are Lena Point, T Harbor, Eagle Beach, and Benjamin Island.
Rumor has it he lands just fine. Here's a look at the sea ice edge across the Bering. You'll notice we're still talking about considerable strips very close to St. Paul and some higher concentration ice that's really not very far away from the island itself. The ice has moved away now from St. George. Recall that we've got that really strong southerly flow. A lot of this ice is going to be on the move in the next several days, not to mention the next several hours. So plan for a lot of changes there around the Pribilovs and further north, also inside of Bristol Bay, where conditions continue to see fewer amounts of ice, as well as Cook Inlet there. So a lot of changes coming. Here's a look at southeast. Northerlies will be in charge. Some of these will be a little more gusty at times than others, but inside you're looking at 25 knots around the Lynn Canal to 15 knots down around the Clarence Strait, 3 to 5 foot seas there. Northerlies on the outer coast, 15 to 20, and seas ranging from 6 to 7 feet on Wednesday. For Thursday, a little bit more of a northeasterly turn coming offshore, anywhere from 20 to 25 across the outer coast, and 5 to 7 foot seas there. Northerlies still holding at 25 knots in the Lynn Canal, and 15 knots down around the Clarence Strait. Stevens Passage also around 25 knots with a 5 foot sea on Thursday. Prince William Sound, northwesterlies, 15 knots with a 3 foot sea, 4 to 5 foot seas across the north and western Gulf, 15 to 20 there. A light and variable wind developing across northern parts of Cook Inlet. But once you get a little bit further south, the winds kick in from the north and northwest around 15 to 20 knots or so, looking at seas from 3 feet in Shelikof Strait to 5 feet west of the Barren Islands and on the eastern side as well. Thursday, northerlies are predominant in Prince William Sound, 15 knots with a 2 foot sea. Northeasterlies outside. As you get into the north and western Gulf, winds are going to switch around a little bit outside of the Resurrection Bay area, 10 knots with a 4 foot sea. Otherwise, northerlies east of the Barrens, northwesterlies east of Kodiak Island. A light and variable wind inside of Shelikof Strait, and north and westerlies across Cook Inlet, 10 to 15 knots with a 2 to 4 foot sea as you head from north to south. Across the Alaska Peninsula and inside Bristol Bay, you'll see an east and north or southeasterly flow, 20 to 30 knots in most areas there. Light and variable winds from Castle Cape to Chignik with a 5 foot sea, 11 foot seas down the Pacific coastline on Wednesday. For Thursday, winds diminish somewhat. A southeasterly flow continues inside of Bristol Bay with a light wind at 2 feet, or a light sea, a small sea at 2 feet. Southerlies across the Bering Sea coast, 15 knots with a 5 foot sea, 11 foot seas on the Pacific coast, and westerlies coming across Castle Cape to Chignik with a 7 foot sea expected on Thursday. For the Aleutians, southerlies are still going for the central and eastern chain, up to 40 knots, in fact, from Unalaska to Nikolsky, with 11-foot seas there, 16-foot seas on the Pacific coast, 17-foot seas down the coast, and up to 18-foot seas, in fact, for Adak to Atka on the Pacific side. Notice the wind shift out west becoming northwesterly there, 15 to 16-foot seas expected for Wednesday, becoming southerly again as low pressure continues to wrap itself around out in the west. South and westerly winds for the central and eastern chain, and winds become more light and variable, but we keep the seas up south of Nikolsky and Unalaska for your Thursday. For the west coast, a broad southeasterly flow is working its way through the central and northern Bering Sea. Seas up to 15 feet in the ice-free areas around St. Paul and St. George. Southeasterlies in the Kuskokwim Delta region, and then ice north of Nunivak Island should hold for a little while longer, 35 knots there, and 9 to 11-foot seas from St. Matthew to St. Lawrence Island around the open water areas there. Again, seas to 9 feet. And then southerly winds continue for Thursday, so it will be warm. 20 to 25 for many areas there. 4-foot seas in the open waters for the Kuskokwim Delta, 6-foot seas around St. Lawrence Island, up to 8-foot seas around St. Matthew and St. Paul and St. George as well. Those winds there from the south at 30. Look for westerlies around the Beaufort Seacoast, 10 to 15. A broad easterly flow, 15 to 25 for the Chukchi Coast and outside of Kotzebue Sound. For your Thursday, winds diminish a little bit across the Beaufort Seacoast, north and easterlies, 10 knots there, otherwise 20 to 25 all the way around the Chukchi Coast for your Thursday. Recapping tonight's weather, a broad southerly wind, a lot of moisture and cold air could bring up to 2 inches of snow around St. Lawrence Island, gusty winds up to 50 miles per hour, and a threat for some freezing rain. Right now, under a quarter inch for you. The worst of the wind should start to come in late tonight and into tomorrow morning. And as you'll see, the front moves across very slowly from west to east, so that should keep the threat for freezing precipitation over your region as we head into Thursday. For southeast, a lot of sun and a lot of heat. Most of the interior also clear and dry, as well as south central and southwest. That's your Alaska weather. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again right here tomorrow.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.